A flashing beacon in the rearview mirror signaled a routine stop, but when a power-obsessed officer decided to act as judge, jury, and executioner toward a cooperative black driver, he committed a monumental error. The man bleeding on the asphalt was no ordinary citizen. He was a federal agent, and retribution was on its way. The unmarked Dodge Charger's dashboard clock read 1:14 in the morning. Special Agent Nicholas Anderson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation was running on empty. He had just concluded a demanding 14-hour stakeout in an adjacent county, tracking a high-level narcotics operation. Nicholas, a seasoned 42-year-old with 15 years of distinguished service, yearned for a hot shower and his own bed. He maintained the speed limit on Route 119, a notoriously deserted highway cutting through the prosperous, heavily patrolled suburbs of Oak Haven County. Nicholas was aware of the Oak Haven Police Department's reputation. It was an open secret within regional law enforcement circles that Oak Haven operated as its own sovereign territory, known for aggressive, revenue-generating traffic stops and a shoot-first, ask-questions-later approach. Nevertheless, Nicholas was piloting a meticulously maintained government vehicle, adhering strictly to every traffic ordinance. 2 miles behind him, Officer Derek Mitchell sat idling on the dark shoulder of the highway. Mitchell wore his badge not as a protector of the community, but as a symbol of dominance. At 34, he had already accumulated 14 civilian complaints, ranging from excessive force to racial profiling, each of which had been conveniently buried by a union representative adept at manipulating the system and a precinct captain who valued arrest statistics above civil liberties. Mitchell relished the night shift, particularly its solitude. Out here in the darkness, his word was absolute law. When Mitchell observed the dark-colored Dodge Charger pass, he did not recognize it as a federal vehicle. He saw an out-of-state license plate and a silhouette he could not clearly discern through the tinted windows. He pulled out, accelerating rapidly until he was tailgating Nicholas. Nicholas glanced in his rearview mirror, immediately recognizing the aggressive driving tactic. It was a textbook intimidation maneuver designed to unnerve a driver, hoping they would swerve or accelerate, thus providing justification for a stop. Nicholas's pulse remained steady. He maintained his speed at precisely 45 miles per hour, his hands resting firmly on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 o'clock positions. After 2 agonizingly long miles of riding the Charger's bumper, Mitchell finally activated his emergency lights, bathing the highway in a blinding flash of red and blue. Nicholas sighed, the exhaustion settling deep into his bones. He signaled deliberately and pulled over onto the wide gravel shoulder, shifting the car into park. He lowered all 4 windows, a standard safety precaution, and illuminated the interior dome light so the approaching officer could clearly see inside. He rested his empty hands placidly on the top of the steering wheel. Mitchell approached the vehicle, his hand resting casually yet menacingly on the butt of his service weapon. He forewent his flashlight, instead shining his high-beam tactical light directly into Nicholas's eyes, blinding him. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now, Mitchell barked, his voice laced with unwarranted authority. "Good evening, officer," Nicholas responded, his tone calm, measured, and free of any hostility. He squinted against the intense light. "Before I retrieve my documents, I must inform you that I'm an armed federal agent. My firearm is secured in a holster on my right hip. My credentials are in my breast pocket. How would you like me to proceed?" It was a standard by-the-book communication. Any trained, rational police officer would have immediately de-escalated the situation, verified the credentials, and cleared the scene. But Derek Mitchell was neither rational nor standard. To him, this calmly speaking black man in the driver's seat was not offering professional courtesy, he was challenging his authority. "Shut your mouth," Mitchell snapped, his voice an octave higher as he drew his weapon, aiming it directly through the open window at Nicholas's head. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "Do not move, officer. My hands are on the wheel," Nicholas replied, his voice unnervingly steady. Though his heart was now pounding against his ribs, he understood the extreme danger of the situation. He was dealing with an unpredictable individual. "I am not moving. I am Special Agent Nicholas Anderson, FBI. If you call your dispatch," I said. "Shut up," Mitchell screamed, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. The veins in his neck bulged. "Get out of the car. Step out of the vehicle with your hands in the air, right now." "I will step out of the car," Nicholas said slowly, enunciating each syllable to ensure clarity. "I am moving my left hand to unbuckle my seat belt. My right hand remains on the wheel." "Do it." Nicholas unbuckled his seat belt and slowly pushed the driver's side door open with his left hand. He stepped out onto the cold asphalt, immediately raising both hands high above his head. He was unarmed, his hands empty, completely compliant, and he stood slightly taller than Mitchell, which seemed to further enrage the patrolman. "Turn around, face the car," Mitchell yelled. Nicholas turned around slowly. "Officer, my badge is in my left pocket. You can reach in and retrieve it. Please, just examine my ID." "I don't care what fake plastic badge you bought on the internet," Mitchell sneered. He holstered his firearm and instantly drew his taser, pointing the twin prongs directly at the center of Nicholas's back. Nicholas heard the distinct plastic click of the taser being armed. A chill of dread washed over him. "Officer, listen to me. Do not deploy that weapon. I am not resisting. I am fully cooperating. Call your supervisor." "You don't give the orders here, boy," Mitchell hissed. The word lingered in the frigid night air, heavy with the weight of decades of bitter history. Before Nicholas could even process the blatant racial slur, the sharp, deafening crack of the taser deploying shattered the silence. Two electrified darts slammed into Nicholas's back. 50,000 volts of electricity surged through his nervous system. The pain was absolute and instantaneous, a searing white-hot fire that seized every muscle in his body simultaneously. Nicholas's vision flashed bright white, the air forcefully expelled from his lungs in a guttural groan. Unable to brace himself, he fell like a felled tree, his face smashing violently against the rough gravel of the highway shoulder. He lay there, convulsing uncontrollably as Mitchell rode the trigger, holding the electrical charge for a full 5 seconds. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Mitchell yelled at the top of his lungs, entirely for the benefit of his body camera microphone. Nicholas couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Blood poured from a deep gash on his forehead where he had struck the ground. As the electrical current finally ceased, leaving him gasping for air in the dirt, he felt a heavy, steel-toed boot pressed down hard onto the back of his neck. "Put your hands behind your back," Mitchell screamed, violently wrenching Nicholas's right arm backward with enough force to nearly tear his rotator cuff before slapping cold steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. 30 minutes later, the holding area of the Oak Haven County Police Precinct was eerily quiet. Nicholas Anderson sat on a cold steel bench, bolted to the concrete wall of the processing cell. His hands remained painfully cuffed behind his back, the metal digging into his wrists. His suit jacket was torn, his dress shirt stained with blood still sluggishly dripping from the laceration above his right eye. His muscles ached with the deep, lingering burn of the taser strike. Despite the pain, his mind was razor sharp, calculating every variable of what was about to unfold. Outside the cell, Derek Mitchell was leaning against the booking desk, holding court. A smug, self-satisfied grin was plastered across his face as he typed out his incident report, crafting a masterpiece of fiction. Suspect was driving erratically. Suspect became belligerent upon contact. Suspect made sudden movements toward his waistband. Less lethal force was deployed to gain compliance. Officer Celine Jenkins, a rookie who had responded as backup only after Nicholas was already bleeding on the ground, stood near the filing cabinets. She looked pale, her eyes darting nervously between Mitchell and the silent man bleeding in the cell. "I'm telling you, Celine, the guy was tweaking," Mitchell boasted loudly, ensuring the other two desk officers heard him. "Tried to tell me he was federal law enforcement. You believe that? Guys like him, they always try to talk their way out of a felony stop." Desk Sergeant William Harris, a 20-year veteran counting down the days until his pension kicked in, sighed. "Did you actually run his name, Mitchell? Or did you just bag his stuff?" "Bagged his stuff?" Mitchell said dismissively, gesturing to the clear plastic evidence bag sitting on the edge of the booking desk. Inside were Nicholas's keys, his wallet, his secure encrypted cell phone, and his leather credentials case. "He's John Doe until I finish writing this up. Then we'll fingerprint him and find out what warrants he's hiding." Sergeant Harris frowned. Something about the suspect's demeanor in the cell was setting off alarm bells in his head. The man hadn't yelled, hadn't cursed, hadn't begged for a phone call. He just sat there, staring blankly at the wall, with the chilling composure of someone entirely in control of the situation. Harris reached over and pulled the evidence bag toward him. He unzipped the top and reached inside, bypassing the wallet and pulling out the heavy leather fold. As Harris flipped the leather case open, the air in the room seemed to vanish. A heavy gold shield caught the harsh fluorescent light of the precinct. Next to it was a laminated identification card. Nicholas T. Anderson, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sergeant Harris felt all the blood drain from his face. His stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. He stared at the badge, then slowly looked up through the thick reinforced glass of the holding cell at the man bleeding on the bench. Then he looked at Mitchell. "Mitchell?" Harris croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "What did you do?" "What?" Mitchell snapped, annoyed at the interruption to his creative writing exercise. Harris turned the leather case around so Mitchell could see it. "This isn't a fake badge, Derek. This is a level 5 biometric secure credential. You tasered an active-duty FBI agent." The precinct fell dead silent. A phone rang in the distance, but nobody moved to answer it. Mitchell's smug grin faltered for a fraction of a second, but his legendary arrogance refused to let him back down. He scoffed, stepping away from the keyboard. "He probably stole it. Or he's impersonating an officer. That's a federal crime right there. I'll add it to the charges." "Derek, shut up!" Harris suddenly roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. The sudden explosion of anger from the normally placid sergeant made Rookie Jenkins jump. "Look at the man's face on the ID. Look at the watermark. He told you he was federal law enforcement. And you put 50,000 volts into him." Panic began to seep into the room. The other desk officers backed away, instinctively distancing themselves from Mitchell. "He was reaching," Mitchell argued, his voice rising in defensive desperation. "He made an furtive movement. My body cam will show it. He refused lawful orders." Inside the cell, Nicholas Anderson finally spoke. His voice carried clearly through the gaps in the plexiglass. It wasn't the voice of a broken suspect. It was the voice of an apex predator patiently waiting for the trap to snap shut. "Sergeant," Nicholas called out, "I would like you to notify your precinct captain immediately. I would also like you to contact the FBI field office in Capital City. Ask to speak to Special Agent in Charge Robert Hughes. Tell him Agent Anderson is being detained." Sergeant Harris swallowed hard, stepping closer to the glass. "Yes, sir." "Do not let Officer Mitchell touch his body camera, his patrol vehicle, or that evidence bag," Nicholas continued. "If a single byte of data goes missing from his camera, I will personally see to it that every officer in this room is indicted for destruction of federal evidence and conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law." Mitchell's face turned an ugly shade of magenta. "You don't run things in here. You piece of... Get in the break room now, Harris commanded, physically stepping between the patrolman and the cell. Jenkins, take Mitchell's duty belt and his body cam. Log them into secure lockup right this second. You can't do that, Mitchell protested, panic finally piercing his shield of arrogance. He looked at Jenkins, who was already approaching him with trembling hands. Celine, don't you touch my gear. I'm Union. Officer Jenkins. Nicholas's voice cut through the room again, cold as ice. If you do not secure that camera right now, you become an accessory after the fact to the assault of a federal officer. The choice is yours. Make a smart one. Jenkins didn't hesitate anymore. She stepped up to Mitchell. Give me the belt, Derek, and the camera. Fuming, muttering a string of violent curses, Mitchell unclipped his belt and slammed it onto the desk alongside his body camera. This is a joke. Captain Gregson is going to laugh this off. You think some suit from the city is going to come in here and push us around? I did my job. Mitchell stormed into the break room, kicking a trash can across the floor. Sergeant Harris's hands were shaking as he picked up the precinct phone. He dialed the emergency contact number for Captain Thomas Gregson. It was 2:15 in the morning. Gregson was going to be furious about being woken up, but as Harris listened to the phone ring, he looked at Agent Anderson, who was now calmly watching the blood drip onto the concrete floor of the cell. Harris knew with absolute certainty that Captain Gregson's anger was going to be the least of their problems. They hadn't just stepped in it, they had declared war on the federal government, and the government was about to drop the hammer. Captain Thomas Gregson arrived at the Oak Haven County Police Precinct at 3:15 a.m., his uniform hastily thrown on, his face flushed with a mixture of sleep deprivation and mounting panic. He was a man who had built a 30-year career on the delicate art of sweeping departmental embarrassments under the rug, but as he walked into the holding area and saw the towering, bloodied figure of Special Agent Nicholas Anderson sitting calmly in the cell, Gregson knew his broom wasn't big enough for this mess. Agent Anderson, Gregson said, his voice attempting a soothing, fraternal tone as he unlocked the cell door himself. My deepest apologies. This is a monumental misunderstanding, a breakdown in communication. Let's get you out of those cuffs and get you over to County General to look at that head wound. We can handle this internally, officer to officer. Nicholas didn't move an inch. He kept his hands securely cuffed behind his back, his eyes locked onto the captain with the cold precision of a sniper. I am not moving, Captain Gregson, and you are not touching these handcuffs. Not until my special agent in charge arrives. Now listen, Nicholas. Can I call you Nicholas? Gregson stammered, his jovial facade cracking. Let's not blow this out of proportion. Mitchell is a hothead. We all know it. I'll suspend him for 2 weeks without pay. I'll write him up. But if you bring the Bureau down on this, it's going to be a media circus. We wear the same color shield. Fundamentally, we're on the same side. We are absolutely not on the same side, Nicholas replied, his voice echoing off the concrete walls, devoid of any warmth. Your officer didn't make a mistake, Captain. He made a choice. He profiled me. He escalated a compliant encounter. He deployed lethal adjacent force without justification, and he falsified a federal incident report. He called me boy before putting 50,000 volts into my spine. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a civil rights violation. Before Gregson could offer another desperate plea, the heavy reinforced steel doors of the precinct's front entrance violently banged open. The quiet hum of the night shift was instantly shattered by the organized chaos of the federal government arriving in force. 6 black Chevrolet Suburbans had just aggressively parked on the front curb, blocking in the patrol cruisers. 12 heavily armed FBI agents wearing tactical vests swarmed into the lobby. Leading them was Special Agent in Charge Robert Hughes, a terrifyingly stoic man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. "Nobody moves. Nobody touches a computer, a phone, or a file," Hughes bellowed, his voice carrying the absolute authority of the United States Department of Justice. "This precinct is now an active federal crime scene." Gregson stepped out of the holding area, his hands raised defensively. "Bob, wait, listen." "Shut your mouth, Tom," Hughes snapped, entirely ignoring the captain's rank. He bypassed Gregson completely and walked straight to the cell, his jaw clenching as he took in the sight of his veteran agent bleeding on the bench. He gestured to one of his tactical agents, who stepped forward with heavy bolt cutters and decisively snapped the metal chain of the handcuffs, freeing Nicholas. "You good, Dave?" Hughes asked quietly. "I'll live, boss," Nicholas said, standing up slowly, wincing as his battered muscles protested. "Secure the body camera." Officer Jenkins had locked it in the evidence room. "Mitchell fabricated his initial report on the booking computer. We've got it." Hughes nodded. He turned back to the terrified precinct staff. "Sergeant Harris, where is Officer Derek Mitchell?" "Break room, sir." Harris pointed with a trembling finger. Two tactical agents kicked the break room door open. Mitchell was sitting at the table, a half-eaten donut in his hand, his face draining of color as the federal agents leveled their weapons at him. "Derek Mitchell," an agent announced, "you are under arrest for the assault of a federal officer, deprivation of rights under color of law, and obstruction of justice. Stand up and put your hands on the wall." The twist, however, was yet to come. The arrogance of Oak Haven PD had blinded them to the bigger picture. Nicholas Anderson hadn't just been driving through their town by coincidence. The 14-hour narcotic surveillance he had just concluded was directly tied to a massive fentanyl distribution ring that the Bureau suspected was receiving protection from local law enforcement. By assaulting Agent Anderson, Derek Mitchell didn't just invite a brutality investigation, he handed the FBI the unilateral legal authority to seize the precinct's servers, audit their communications, and tear their evidence lockers apart, looking for the missing body camera footage. Mitchell's catastrophic ego had just kicked open the doors to a massive systemic corruption probe that would ultimately bring down half the department. Months later, the federal courthouse in Capital City was a media fortress. The trial of United States versus Derek Mitchell had become a national spectacle. Mitchell's high-priced union lawyer, Richard Sterling, strutted around the courtroom, attempting to paint a picture of a dedicated public servant making a split-second decision in a dark, high-stress environment. But Assistant United States Attorney Cynthia Powell was a legal butcher, and she had come to carve. Mr. Sterling claims his client was in fear for his life. Counsel Powell commenced her opening remarks to the jury, asserting that Agent Anderson was erratic, perilous, and confrontational. "Let our recollections not be our guide. Let the recording serve as our foundation," she implored. Powell subsequently reduced the illumination in the courtroom and projected Mitchell's own body-worn camera recordings onto the expansive display screens. The jury observed in a state of astonished, hushed reverence. They witnessed Nicholas Anderson exhibiting perfect compliance, his hands resting on the steering wheel, conversing with utmost professionalism. They observed Mitchell's aggressive, unhinged escalation, heard the distinct activation of the taser, and then its reverberation throughout the somber, wood-paneled chamber. The damning audio was rendered with crystalline clarity. This was followed by the ghastly crackle of the taser and Nicholas's agonizing descent. As the lights gradually returned to their normal intensity, 3 members of the jury were visibly moved to tears. The judge, the esteemed Arthur Pendleton, cast a stern gaze from the bench towards the defense counsel's table, his countenance reflecting profound disdain. Mitchell, attired in his impeccably tailored suit, suddenly appeared diminished. His former swagger had completely vanished, supplanted by the crushing realization that his capacity for deception, his leverage, and his good fortune had all been exhausted. The repercussions of the trial unfolded with swift and unforgiving severity. Upon learning that the Federal Bureau of Investigation was preparing to launch a Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, prosecution against the Oak Haven Police Union for their alleged role in financing the defense of officers found to be corrupt, the union's leadership made a stark, strategic decision aimed at self-preservation. They unequivocally renounced Derek Mitchell. They terminated his legal financial support midway through the proceedings, compelling him to seek counsel from a court-assigned public defender who had scarcely had sufficient time to thoroughly review the case documentation. His purported comrades in uniform abandoned him entirely, declining to offer testimony as character witnesses on his behalf. The jury's deliberations concluded in under 3 hours. The outcome was devastating. He was found guilty on every charge. The day designated for sentencing arrived under a heavily overcast sky. The courtroom was filled to its absolute capacity. Nicholas Anderson occupied a seat in the front row of the public gallery, dressed in a sharp navy suit, a faint silver scar above his right eye being the sole remaining physical testament to that night en route 119. He observed with a chilling, stoic composure as Derek Mitchell was escorted into the courtroom. Mitchell was no longer wearing his badge or a bespoke suit. Instead, he was clad in the vibrant orange attire indicative of a federal detention facility. His wrists were secured by heavy iron restraints, and his ankles were shackled. His characteristic swagger had completely dissipated. His eyes appeared hollow, sunken, and nervously scanned the room. He bore a striking resemblance to the terrified, broken individuals he had spent his entire career menacing. Judge Arthur Pendleton adjusted his spectacles and fixed his gaze upon the disgraced officer. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Pendleton began, his voice resonating with the profound weight of his authority. "In my 2 decades presiding over this bench, I have adjudicated cases involving criminal syndicates, organized crime figures, and perpetrators of homicide. However, the transgressions committed by those who pledge to safeguard the public and subsequently exploit that authority to instill terror are of a uniquely insidious nature, holding a particularly dark place in the spectrum of human frailty." Mitchell kept his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands exhibiting a slight tremor, the chains emitting a faint rattle in the hushed room. "You did not err, sir," the judge continued, his words echoing Nicholas's own statements from the precinct. "You operated under the misguided belief of absolute immunity. You harbored the conviction that the badge you wore served as both a bulwark against accountability and a weapon to be wielded against anyone who dared to challenge your delicate ego. You singled out a man based on the color of his skin. You subjected him to violent assault and then, with profound cowardice, attempted to falsify official records to conceal your actions. It is solely through divine intervention that the man you assaulted possessed the necessary training to survive and the professional standing to ensure that your attempts to bury him would prove futile." The judge paused, allowing the silence to settle heavily upon the courtroom. Derek Mitchell was found guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law for the assault of a federal agent and for obstruction of justice. It is the judgment of this court that you be committed to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a period of 180 months or 15 years. You will serve this sentence with no possibility of early parole. A collective exhalation of astonishment rippled through the gallery. Mitchell's knees appeared to weaken slightly, his defense attorney having to steady him by the arm to prevent him from falling. 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The harsh retribution struck with the force of a runaway locomotive. Mitchell was not destined for a minimum security facility reserved for white-collar offenders. Due to the violent nature of the assault, he was assigned to a medium-high security federal penitentiary located in the Midwest. A former law enforcement officer within the confines of a federal prison is a marked individual. A former officer imprisoned for abusing their authority is a perpetual target. Mitchell's days of demanding deference were irrevocably over. He would spend the subsequent decade and a half perpetually looking over his shoulder, living in a constant state of suffocating apprehension. His pension was revoked. His wife, unable to withstand the public shame and financial devastation, initiated divorce proceedings before his first year of incarceration had concluded. Back in Oak Haven, the repercussions continued to cascade. Following the revelation of the body camera footage, the Department of Justice placed the entirety of the Oak Haven Police Department under a federal consent decree. Captain Thomas Gregson was compelled into early retirement, his professional reputation irrevocably tarnished. Sergeant Harris submitted his resignation. A dozen other officers with documented complaint histories similar to Mitchell's were subsequently investigated, indicted, and removed from the force. Agent Nicholas Anderson returned to his duties. He resumed his position at his desk, removed the fentanyl ring, and continued his career with the same quiet, unyielding dedication he had always demonstrated. He did not exude triumph. He did not grant interviews to the press. He simply allowed the justice system, which had nearly been weaponized against him, to function precisely as it was designed to for individuals like Mitchell who preyed on others. On the evening of Mitchell's transfer to his final cell block, the heavy steel door slammed shut behind him with a resounding final clang. The lights within the block dimmed. For the first time in his life, Derek Mitchell found himself utterly alone in the darkness, surrounded by the very individuals he had once preyed upon. With no one coming to his aid, it is evident that the badge symbolizes public trust, not an entitlement to tyranny. Derek Mitchell's spectacular downfall serves as a stark and sobering reminder that excessive arrogance ultimately engenders its own destruction. When those who have sworn to uphold the law believe themselves to be exempt from its application, justice, though potentially delayed, will ultimately prevail. True accountability operates as an inescapable force of nature.